Our first story is from Called in the 90s. A lawyer's pro-revenge on his boss. This opinion is shit, my boss told me. He'd been a lawyer for 3 years, and the firm assigned me to him for training, to show me, junior counsel, how to be a litigator. I disliked my boss for a number of reasons. He knew no law, and he expressed himself badly in writing. For a litigator, that's like strike 1 and 2 right there, and strike 3 was this. He had no balls. He was actually scared of going to court. I noticed this when he took me to assignment court one day, and when it was his turn to speak, his hands were shaking. He was scared, in fucking assignment court, where all you do is set a trial date. "What's wrong with what I wrote?" I said. "Not what I asked for," he said, turning away. But when I checked the memo he'd emailed me 2 weeks earlier, I saw that the opinion I wrote was exactly what he asked for. I knew what was up. He was going to delete my dockets for writing the memo and then claim he did it himself, thus leaving quite a bit short of my docketing quota for the month. I knew that he would do this to me because he'd done this before. I knew that my memo would wind up on a partner's desk without my name on it. I knew that for a fact because the firm I worked at was one of the first in the city to have a really good internal network. We were using email for internal communications before the internet became a thing. So the firm was way ahead in terms of technology, but not in terms of security. And not long after I joined the firm, I learned how to surf away on the firm's hard drive and find interesting things, like evidence that my boss was plagiarizing my work. My boss was the very model of the young downtown lawyer. His perfect shoes always gleamed. He wore bespoke suits because he came from money. Everyone just took it for granted that he was on the partner track. I, on the other hand, was well on my way to nowhere special, so maybe he thought it was okay to fuck with me. If so, that was a big mistake on his part. I didn't like having my billable hours fucked with. I seriously resented it, because I was already being targeted as one of the juniors who doesn't dock it as much as he should, and I was getting pushback from the partner who headed our team. I told the partner what was going on, but he didn't care. It was like being back in middle school and showing up in the office with bruises on my face and the principal saying, "Boys will be boys," and sending me on my way. "You'll just have to work harder or smarter," the partner said when I reported the latest bullshit thing my boss did to me. I couldn't work harder. I was doing the usual 6 days a week lawyers downtown is forced to do. But I could work smarter, and that night I thought up a plan. Christmas was coming, and I thought I'd give my boss a little present. It landed on his desk on December 24th, in the form of a memo purporting to be from the partner that my boss reported to. The partner was an old guy, and not really on board with emails and computers, so he did everything old school on paper. So when my boss came in on December 24th and saw a memo on his desk from the partner with a legal research assignment, that wasn't unusual. The memo was drafted in the usual form that the partner used because, of course, I had taken great pains to make sure that it looked authentic. My boss walked over to the little cubicles where the juniors worked and gave me the same memo. Except his secretary had retyped it, so now the assignment was from him to me instead of from the partner to my boss. The assignment was difficult, requiring me to do a deep dive into admiralty law, its relationship to the common law, combined with a constitutional division of powers question. "But this is a huge assignment," I whined, "and I'm going to be away. Can't you get someone else to do it? Is it really urgent?" The memo I'd forged to my boss stressed how totally urgent the situation was, but there was no way my boss could double-check with the partner, because the partner left the day before on vacation. That's why I'd waited until December 24th. "No can do," my boss said. "This is a big deal. Just let HR know. Maybe they'll give you time and half or something." He turned his back and walked away, thinking he had ruined my holidays. But he was mistaken. You see, I'd written a paper for a third-year course that was basically the same thing as the research assignment in the memo. So the only work I had to do was to find the old floppy disk with the draft on it, fiddle with it a bit, and voila. A very detailed and very long memo on an obscure point of admiralty law, with references starting back to Lord Coke's day. So I put the memo together and took my holidays as planned. I wasn't traveling anywhere because I had no money, but I saw my family and stayed in town, and I made a point of dropping by the office during the holidays, sending an email or two, establishing that I was around, and docketing all my time for the huge amount of research I was allegedly doing. So the holidays end, and I'm sitting in my shitty little cubicle with a huge stack of work to do, and my boss comes up to me in one of his bespoke suits with a gold tie pin and cufflinks to match. He was wearing a gold watch too. He was dressed up, even for him, trying to make an impression of some kind. "Where's that memo? You were supposed to have it on my desk when I got back. I'm going into a meeting at noon." "Just finished it this morning," I said, handing him the lengthy memo that was still warm from the printer. My boss took the memo in his hands and felt its heft, and he smiled. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Just before lunch, I heard a commotion down the hall. It was a pretty loud commotion, as such things go, a loud "fuck," and then a door was flung open. It was the partner, and he was screaming for my boss to get his ass into his office. Now. Right now, as in immediately. I had the pleasure of watching my boss scramble down the hall. "Just what the fucking fuck is this?" the partner said, standing in the doorway to his office and holding my handiwork at arm's length with his thumb and index finger, as if he were afraid that handling it would soil him. My boss mumbled something, and then the partner ushered him inside. I heard more shouting, then the sound of muffled excuses, and then more shouting from the partner. Then the door flung open again. "Call it in the 90s. Get your ass in here too," the partner said, and I got my ass in there pronto. "Did you write this fucking memo?" the partner said. I took it from him and looked it over. "I wrote it. The cover page has been changed to remove my name, but other than that, it's mine. I spent all Christmas on it. Is there something wrong with it?" The partner exploded. "Is there something wrong with it? Something wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong with it. It's fucking useless. Totally useless." I explained that I'd followed my boss's instructions to the letter and that I'd docketed more than 100 hours on it. At this, the partner really went nuts and told me to go back to my desk and fetch him the memo from my boss. I brought it to him, and when he read it, his face went red. He told me I could leave, and I hauled ass out of there. From my little cubicle, I wasn't close enough to hear the full chewing out my boss got, but I heard the details through the grapevine over the next few days about how the partners were seriously pissed that my boss had wasted over 100 hours of a junior's time on a useless task that was obviously a prank. And how had my boss not realized that he was being pranked? Was he an idiot? I wasn't blamed at all, of course. I had been working under my boss's close supervision. My boss didn't get fired, but there were some good outcomes for me. For one thing, the partner told me to send him a copy of any memos I wrote for my boss, and that ended him taking credit for my work. My boss also stopped deleting my dockets for my research. Plus, I got a belated Christmas bonus for having to give up on my alleged vacation to write the stupid memo. I really hated working in that place, but whenever times were tough, I'd think back to the case of the forged memo, and that always brought a smile to my face. OP had a very satisfying prank on his toxic boss. The boss wanted to spoil OP's holidays, but the prank ended up ruining boss's own reputation in the office and raised questions about his competence. It was really satisfying. Kudos to the OP for exposing the reality of toxic boss. Our second story is also from Khaled in the 90s. Revenge on a client who tried to throw me under the bus. I was pushing 40, and I'd learned a lot of lessons in more than 10 years of legal practice. But one of the most important lessons I learned was from an older lawyer that I worked for as a summer student after the second year of law school. "A lawyer has 3 duties," he told me. "First to himself, second to the court, and last, the client. Always make sure you come first and the client comes last." The reason? "Because clients will fuck you," he said. "They'll throw you under the bus without thinking twice." I should have stayed with this lawyer, but being young and an idiot, I had to go work downtown. And I'm still downtown now. But fortunately for me, I remembered this lesson, and it came in handy many years later when a client really did try to throw me under the bus. My client was this mid-sized company that did this and that and owned things here and there, not big enough to be listed, but it did have a pretty sizable real estate portfolio, and one day, a building they owned burned to the ground. The company wanted to collect on the insurance, so they told Frank, a veteran salaryman, to deal with it. Frank was close to 60 and thought he knew what he was doing. He didn't need me to help him with the insurance claim, he told me. He had everything under control. Besides, lawyers are expensive. Some guys really get off on not paying legal fees, and Frank was one of those guys who gloated over every penny that he managed not to pay to the lawyers. I dealt with Frank a lot, and he was always nickel and dimming me. "The insurer is going to fuck you," I told Frank. It was only by luck that I even knew about the fire and the loss, because Frank had not asked for my help. He'd just let it slip one day, and since then, I'd kept on top of him, trying to get him to smarten up. I'd had to fight to get him to send me the proof of loss form to make sure he hadn't messed that up. Frank fucked up a lot, and I wondered sometimes how he had a job. But the proof of loss was okay at least, so that was one less thing to worry about. "You don't know that," he said. I could tell he just wanted to get me off the phone. "I'm paid to know when insurers are trying to screw my clients," I said, "and the insurer is going to screw you. They've been stringing you along for ages with requests and questions and paperwork, but they aren't going to pay you, not unless you sue them." But Frank said he knew what he was doing, that it was all under control, and besides, he got along with the adjuster so great. "The limitation period expires in 2 weeks," I said, "and once that 2 weeks pass, it will be too late to sue. The moment that limitation period expires, they will stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email saying, 'Sorry, you're out of time,' and that will be that. Don't leave this till the last minute. Let me sue right now, and you'll have the money in no time." Frank was like, "Sure, fine, whatever. Don't bother me, I got this, blah, blah, blah." And he got off the phone as soon as he could. I sent him the usual email with clear warnings and recommendations, which he ignored. I sent the email again, and then again as the limitation period approached, and again a couple of days before the deadline. "I'm going to be at trial, and you won't be able to reach me," my final email said. "But you have to sue. You have other firms on your list, so pick one and sue." He didn't bother to reply, and I went off to do my trial. The trial lasted a couple of weeks, and no email from Frank. Then a month passed, and another month, still no email. I figured he must have sorted things out. Maybe Frank was right after all, I said to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Frank. "Remember that fire insurance thing we spoke about?" We'd only spoken about it like a dozen times. I figured he was calling up to gloat, so I cut to the chase. "So they paid out." "That's great, Frank. You were right." He asked me what I was talking about and could he see a copy of the claim? "What claim?" I said. "The claim against the insurer. You know, that claim." "Does that mean the insurer didn't pay?" I said. He hung up on me, and then a few minutes later, my computer dinged, and there was Frank's email talking about how we spoke, and he told me to sue, and he was worried when I hadn't sent him a copy of the claim, so he was following up to get a copy of the claim. I emailed him back. "I take it that the insurer didn't pay you, just like I told you they wouldn't, and now that the limitation period has expired, they told you to jump in the lake, leaving you with a loss in the millions. Is that it?" I'd made a mistake by not going over Frank's head when he wouldn't listen to me, but if I'd gone over Frank's head, I never would have received another file from him, so I didn't. But that was then, and this was now. So I CC'd Frank's boss and his boss's boss, plus I CC'd Bill, the client's in-house counsel. Bill acknowledged my email right away and called me later that day. "Frank messed up," he said. "We know that. He's an idiot. So what do we do?" "So his excuses didn't work?" "Nope." Bill explained that they'd summoned Frank to a boardroom, but his story didn't add up, given all the warnings I'd sent him. Besides, there would have been no reason for him to keep emailing the insurer if he'd told me to sue. Once the file goes to legal counsel, Frank's role was over. The company knew Frank was bullshitting them. So that's it then? Bill said. We just lost a couple of $1,000,000. It's okay, I said, explaining that when I realized that Frank was going to fuck up, I issued a claim against the insurer. Because I'd made Frank send me the proof of loss a while earlier, I had enough information that I could sue to preserve the cause of action. Not a great claim and short on details, but good enough. You sued without instructions? Bill said. Lawyers aren't supposed to sue without instructions because if you do that, you're personally liable for whatever costs the other side incurs. It's a big deal to sue without instructions. Yup, I said. I sued without instructions. I pulled up a copy of the claim and emailed it to him as we spoke. It's a little rough, I said, but we can always amend. Thank God, Bill said. Can I leave it with you? Of course he could. The insurer was a sitting duck, and I knew I'd collect from them, no problem. A few days later, I got a call from another guy who worked for the client, a guy I didn't normally deal with. They had a situation and needed my help. I usually deal with Frank, I said. What's up? What was up was that Frank got called into another meeting and they handed him a one-page letter, and then he put his little office things in a box and security walked him past his co-workers to the elevator and escorted him downstairs to the parking lot. Bye-bye, Frank. He was too old to get another job, or at least not a decent one. It was a life-changing event for Frank, but for me, he was just an anecdote, a cautionary tale that I tell young lawyers sometimes over beers. Maybe too often, because I'm getting on in years and I have my favorite stories. I wasn't trying to get revenge on Frank, not at all, and I would have felt a bit sorry for him if he hadn't been trying to throw me under the bus. But the guy who replaced him was great and never nickel and dimed me. So it was all good. Though not intentional, it was really a perfect revenge. Frank's non-serious behavior of ignoring legal advice would have cost the company millions if the lawyers had not filed a claim without Frank's instruction. The lawyer turned out to be a hero and savior for the company. And on the other hand, the incident was the beginning of the professional downfall of Mark. Such a non-serious executive deserves it.